Hello, everyone. Welcome to the second day of the 2023 International E-Conference on Holocaust Studies. My name is Dr. Mehek Burza, and I'm the head of the Holocaust and Religious Studies in the Global Center for Religious Research, founded and headed by Dr. Darren Slade. Keep in mind that each of these presentations are video recorded, so the information presented here will be available free of charge to you just for coming out and supporting us. So thank you for that. Now, for those attending live, feel free to use the chat box to discuss with other attendees or to ask questions as they come up. Our speakers will do their best to answer your questions at the end of their presentations. You'll also be able to unmute yourself at the end so that you can directly ask the presenter questions by your own. And with that said, let me introduce you to our speaker, Professor Liat Steir-Livny. She will be speaking on Holocaust representations at the Crossroads, animated documentary and memory. She's an associate professor at the Sapir Academic College and the Open University of Israel. She teaches in the Department of Culture at Sapir Academic College, the Cultural Studies MA program, and the Department of Literature, Language, and the Arts at the Open University of Israel. Her research focuses on Holocaust commemoration in Israel from the 1940s until the present. It combines Holocaust studies, memory studies, cultural studies, trauma studies, and film studies. She is also the author of many articles and 5 books. Welcome, Professor. The floor is all yours.
Thank you very much. I'm just gonna share my screen. Presentation. So you can see it?
Perfect.
Great. So first of all, thank you for having me. And today I want to talk about a new special genre within the documentary realm. These are animated documentaries. When I say new, I'm talking about something that developed within the field of Holocaust studies from the 1990s onward. But there is very scant research on it, and I'm going to talk about it and show you one example out of many. My presentation is titled A Trip to the Other Planet, Cassette Revision of Auschwitz under LSD. And I'm gonna explain all this in just a minute. I just wanna introduce you to the protagonist of this talk. So on the right hand, you can see author Yechiel Dinur. He named himself Katsetnik. We're gonna talk about it in a few minutes. And on the left hand, you can see the film's title. It is titled A Trip to the Other Planet. And here in the small picture is the director, Tom Klass. This film was directed at 2013. It was a project at Sapir Academic College in which I teach, and I'm going to show you extras from it in just a minute. So since we have 2 protagonists and 2 topics, which I'm going to combine here, I'm going to start with the Yechiel Feiner, then I'm going to move to animated documentary, then animated documentary about the Holocaust, and then we'll move to our case study, which is the film. So this is the protagonist. His name is Yechiel Feiner. After the Holocaust, he's changed his last name to Dinur. It means fire, and it has a lot to do with the fire in the crematorium in Auschwitz. And we're going to understand in a minute why I refer to him as Katsetnik. So he was a Jewish polar writer. During the Holocaust, he was imprisoned in Sosnovich ghetto. His family was murdered there. He was transported to Auschwitz, and he survived. According to his testimony, he spent 2 years in Auschwitz. After World War II ended, he was healing in Naples, Italy, and there he wrote his first novel titled Salamandra. When he signed this novel, he didn't sign his name. He didn't write Yechiel Feiner, but he signed Katsetnik. And Katsetnik means prisoner in a concentration camp. Katsetnik is a word which is a hybrid of Yiddish and German, and it's the way that the prisoners address to themselves. They call themselves Katsetniks because they were prisoners in a concentration camp. So this is a pseudonym, which means a prisoner in a concentration camp, but it means much more than that. It means that he took it upon himself to represent the Holocaust victims, the dead and the alive. And this is a huge responsibility. And Katsetnik immigrated to Israel, and he wrote many books during his lifetime. The vast majority dealt with the Holocaust. And when he wrote about the Holocaust, he described himself not as an author, not as someone who writes fiction, but as somebody who writes the chronicles of Auschwitz, meaning this is the documentation of what he experienced in Auschwitz. And when his books were published in the 1940s and in the 1950s in Israel, when very little was written about the Holocaust back then, his books were perceived as documentation, meaning what he wrote, probably it's a chronicle, a documentation of what happened in the ghettos, in the concentration camps, in Auschwitz. He wrote without any linguistic boundaries, meaning he wrote about horrific things, without censorship, without nothing. He wrote about prostitution, he wrote about cannibalism, he wrote about betrayal. His books are talked about, or people who read his books in the 1940s and the 1950s say that they couldn't sleep for weeks after reading them. And if you read one of them, you can probably understand why. Very hard to read because of the atrocities in them. He doesn't talk about himself in the first person, but he has this alter ego in this film, and he talks through this alter ego, telling the story of the Holocaust. And since he wrote under the pseudonym Katsetnik, nobody in Israel knew who he was. He was a mystery. The first time the Israelis knew who he was during the Eichmann trial. As we all know, Adolf Eichmann was caught in Argentina and he was brought to trial in Israel. There were 110 witnesses who came to testify during his trial, and Yechiel Dinu was one of them. And his testimony is one of the most known testimonies from the Eichmann trial, even though it was the shortest one, because what happened is that when he was on the stand, first of all, he didn't really know if he wants to do it. He contemplated about it, then he decided that, okay, he's going to do it. And he entered the stand and he sat there. And when he sat there, he went through a thing that Dominique Lacapra calls acting out, meaning he lost the boundaries between the past and the present. And the past took over him. And instead of answering questions, he began telling that he's seeing them right now, the people standing in line to the gas chambers. He couldn't stand, he couldn't sit, he had to stand, and then he fainted. And you can see here how the cops tried to wake him up, and they took him away, and his testimony ended there. It was very short testimony. It was known worldwide because he was the only one who fainted on the stand. And this was the first time that Israel and the world came to acknowledge that the person behind the pseudonym Katsetnik is this person called Yechiel Dinu. His books were a tremendous success worldwide from the beginning. They were published to many, many languages, and this was the first time the world came to know who the man is. Now, moving to the second topic, animated documentary, and then we're gonna combine the two topics. So I said earlier that animated Holocaust documentaries are a new layer in Holocaust commemoration because it began from the 1990s. But animated documentary began much earlier. The first animated documentary film was made in 1918. You see here the picture. It talks about the sinking of the Lusitania, a ship that was sunk in 1915 during World War I. And when we talk about animated documentaries, what is this genre? So of course, it's a subgenre of documentaries, and it tells, like in documentaries, it tells real stories of real people, and the stories are presented through many times through their voiceover and their testimonies, meaning there's no fiction here, but the stories are represented visually through animation. So this is kind of a hybrid between an animation film and a documentary. It's all true, it's all based on testimonies and evidence, but the visual is animation. And since the visual is animation, for many years, scholars and academics have treated this genre with contempt. It was like a Mickey Mouse film, meaning you cannot treat serious subject, let alone tragic subject, through an animated documentary because animation is something for kids, it's juvenile, it's not serious, and so on. But these notions have changed over the years. So, first of all, the, since the 1960s, in a postmodern world, the whole notion of truth completely changed. People began to understand from the 1960s onward that truth and objectivity are very complex words. And even when we talk about an historical text, and even when we talk about a documentary, it's not a reflection of reality. There's no such thing as a reflection of reality. There's always implotment. Even when we talk about an historian who sits down and writes, even when we talk about a documentarist, what we teach and we learn in the first lesson in documentary studies or in cinema studies, that you have to understand that the place you put the camera, when you decide where to put the camera, then you decide about the narrative. Because if you place the camera above the person you interview, then he looks shrunk and he looks very miserable. If you put the camera in a low angle, then this person looks very big and full of power. So there's no such thing as a reflection of reality. A documentary is not a reflection of reality. An historical text is not a reflection or an accurate reflection of reality. An animated documentary is also not a reflection of reality, but it's not so different than the other genres. Another thing is the advances in computer technology. As technology developed more and more, animation had so many new ways to go to and deal with real topics, and it completely changed the genre. So when we talk about the period from the 1990s onward, these are times in which animated documentary has entered film festivals, it had entered film departments in universities. People can understand that with the help of animated documentary, one can address tragedies, very tough topics, not even the Holocaust. We talk about crimes, we talk about immigration, we can talk about any other topics, people who went through suffering and so on, with the help of animated documentaries. And maybe even animated documentaries have two advantages over live documentaries. The first one is that animation can visualize what was not captured on camera. When we talk about the Holocaust, we know that the things in the ghettos, in the concentration camps, were not filmed. And with the help of animated documentary, one can enter these spaces and try to visualize what was not filmed back then. And another great thing is that animated documentary can point inward. It can represent internal worlds and visualize the invisible aspects of life, meaning one can visualize what happens within the mind of a human being, of a Holocaust survivor. And this is a great addition to what we knew until now about the representation of the Holocaust and Holocaust memory. So since the 1990s onward, animated documentary is perceived more and more as a legitimate hybrid form which mixes realistic themes and fantastic forms. And again, it became a new genre within Holocaust memory. So when I began searching this topic, I saw that even though in the Yad Vashem library there are around 150 films dealing, or 150 films which are animated documentary, there's almost no research about it. And my book about this topic was just came out just this month, so it's a brand new book. And in this book, I discuss this phenomenon. I discuss animated documentaries, and I address their advantages and disadvantages. And believe me, you can find both things within this genre. You can see how in the advantages field, you can, through animated documentary, comprehend more deeply what's going on in the mind of a victim and of a Holocaust survivor, and later on of the second generation and the third generation. You can see what we couldn't see before, things that happened in the concentration camps, in the ghettos. But the animated documentaries that were created from the 1990s until today have also disadvantages, and I'm not going to tell you what they are. I want you to read the book. So it was published by Edinburgh University Press. It's on Amazon, and I'd be happy if you can read it and tell me what you think. So the topic I'm addressing today, or the film I'm addressing today, is only one example out of many in the book. And again, the film is titled A Trip to the Other Planet. We're going to talk about the title and its meaning in just a few minutes. And I just want to tell you that it concentrates on Yechiel Dinur, on Katzetnik. This film talks about two things, and I want to show you extras from its two parts. The first part talks about Yechiel Dinur, the Holocaust survivor, and his life in Tel Aviv in the 1960s, in the 1970s. This part is an excellent part, or an excellent case study to show how animated documentaries can show us what was not filmed and make us understand even better or deeper what's going on in the mind of a Holocaust survivor, how a Holocaust survivor experiences his surrounding. So he survived the Holocaust. This is Tel Aviv, 1960s, 1970s. And what director Tom Klass chose to do is to paint him as somebody who walks around Tel Aviv wearing the striped uniform from Auschwitz. And I want to show you 3 minutes from this part, and then we're going to talk about it. So I'm going to move to the film. So just a minute. If there's any problem with the sound, please let me know.
כשאני הייתי באושוויץ במשך 2 ימים, יצאתי והסתכלתי לכביש. וראיתי רק את הזוג עיניים שעולות עליי, אלא היו הפנסים, 2 הפנסים של המסעיות, שהלכו בלי הפסק לקרמטוריום ישר. אם אני יכול לעמוד כאן לפניכם היום ולספר את הקורות מתוך הפלנטה הזאת, אם אני הנפיל, הרי אני מאמין באמונה שלמה שזה הודות לשבועה שנשבעתי להם שם. אין הזמן שם כפי שהוא כאן על הכדור הארץ. ולתושבי פלנטה הזאת לא היו שמות. נשמו לפי חוקי טבע אחרים במלחמת אושוויץ. כשאני נפלתי מאושוויץ החוצה, זאת אומרת יצאתי לעולם, לא האמנתי למראות עיניי. ראיתי שום דבר לא נשתנה כאן בעולם. הייתי אותו דבר, אותם השמיים, אותו הארץ, לא יכולתי את זה לקבל. אני רואה אותם, הם מסתכלים בי.
תתקדם בבקשה. אדוני, תתקדם בבקשה.
שב נאמר.
מה יש?
אני ראיתי אותם ליד התור,
אולי תרשה לי מרגיש.
אני זוכר.
רגע אחד, תשמע עכשיו לי. שקט. שבו במקומכם בבקשה, אני מבקש מאוד, כן? כל אחד ישב במקומו.
Okay, so let me just go back to my presentation so we can discuss it. Okay, so first of all, we said earlier that animated documentaries are based on testimonies and evidence of real people. The voiceover that you hear throughout the film is Yechiel Dinur himself, it's Kasetnik himself, in a very rare interview he gave in the 1980s to Ram Evron on Israeli television. This is Kasetnik himself talking about his experiences. Now, when we talk about what we saw here in the first part of the film, I want to go back to what I said earlier about the way that Dominique Lacapra, following Freud, talks about the responses of survivors to the past. And he discusses the way people experience PTSD and the way that people find it mentally or can avoid it and work through the trauma. So Lacapra talks about two things, about acting out, when the past is not constructed as a distant memory, but is experienced as an integral part of present-day life. There are no boundaries between past and present. On the other hand, a Holocaust survivor who can work through the trauma, it means that the survivor builds clear boundaries between past and present, meaning the survivor knows what pain he underwent, but he or she can put these boundaries, these mental boundaries between past and present, and understand that this was there and this is now, and there are differences between these time zones. So when we see Kasetnik roaming the streets of Tel Aviv, we understand that what the director wants to tell us is that we're talking about a person who, in many parts of his life, couldn't work through the trauma, but the trauma entered the present, took over the present, and he was acting out the trauma. First of all, he roams the street of Tel Aviv wearing his striped uniform. Second of all, when he talks about the trucks that he sees on the road, these are not trucks, these are not cars, These are the eyes of the people who went to the crematorium. When he walks the streets of Tel Aviv, instead of seeing billboards, he sees himself giving this famous testimony I talked about earlier in the Eichmann trial, meaning there is a complete blur of times. Sometimes he's in the Holocaust before 1945, sometimes it's 1961, but it's not Tel Aviv of the present, which is not connected to the Holocaust. When he walks through the store, when he sees these shoes, you can of course understand that it refers to the shoes found in Auschwitz and now presented in Auschwitz. When he sees a dog that barks, we can understand as well this is not a dog in Tel Aviv. These are the dogs the Nazis had used in the concentration camps and in the ghettos. And of course, the usher in the cinema who just wants to see if people can enter. For Katsetnik, it's not an usher in the cinema, it's again a selection, and then he walks away. He can't take it. So this is a perfect way of explaining how a Holocaust survivor experienced acting out of the trauma, because we can see what he sees. We can see it through his eyes. We hear his testimony, and the visual, this visual of animated documentary, gives us the opportunity to understand what Katsetnik felt like or what it was like for him living in Tel Aviv of the 1960s and of the 1970s. As the symptoms grew stronger and stronger, his wife told him that she wants him to go and get treatment with this psychiatrist called Jan Bastiaans in Holland, in the Netherlands. This was an experimental treatment under LSD. And in 1976, Dinur traveled with his wife to the Netherlands, and he stayed there for a year, and he was treated by this Dutch psychiatrist who got a special permission from the government to do this experiment with LSD. And Dinur was recorded through the treatments, and he documented his experience in another book he wrote. Here you can see it. It's called Sofen Edma. And now is the time to address the film's title. The film is titled The Trip to the Other Planet. So when we talk about the trip, the film or the animated documentary enables us to tour Dinur's mind. But the trip, as we all know, is also the narcotic influence of LSD. So the word trip has a double meaning. And when we talk about the other planet, this too has double meaning, because the other planet can be Dinur's mind, a place he can enter under LSD, and we, the audience, can enter because of due to the help of animated documentary. But the other planet is also an idiom Dinur coined and he used during the Eichmann trial when he referred to Auschwitz as another planet. And this is very important because what we're about to see right now is a life-changing experience for him, or the minute he understood that Auschwitz is not another planet. So for the decades until 1976, Dinur said that Auschwitz was another planet, meaning it was something beyond the universe. It was not done by human beings. It was done by people who are, we can't even call them criminals because they are not even people, animals maybe, or something like that. He said that people lived and breathed there under different rules. Nobody in the regular world or the regular planet can understand it. This is a completely different, unique planet which nobody can understand unless he was there. And then he went to the Netherlands and he went through this treatment and he had a life-changing experience. So I want to show you 2 minutes from the film, and then we can discuss this life-changing experience. Just a minute.
הסתכלתי וראיתי פתאום איך שהאססמן הזה עומד בשחר של אושוויץ קר ומפהק. אז שאלתי את עצמי, האם הוא שונא אותי? הרי הוא לא מכיר אותי. ראיתי את האדם מותו. ראיתי בשעת שהוא שלח אותי לקרמטוריום, האססמן הזה, ראיתי אותו, הוא היה אדם, הוא לא היה שטן. אז ידעתי, אושוויץ לא השטן יצר ולא אלוהים, אלא האדם.
Okay, so what we saw right now is what the Noor saw within his mind when he was under LSD. Again, he documented it and he wrote it in his book, Sof Enigma. And this is a life-changing moment for him. The moment he saw when he went back to Auschwitz under LSD and saw the Nazi officer yawn. Again, when we talk about another planet or the other planet, we talk about a place that was created by Satan. It's not something that is real. But when he went there under LSD, which was, of course, very dangerous because a man in his mental situation could have not returned. But when he went there under LSD, he understood that the way he described Auschwitz, and again, he's a very well-known author, so he described Auschwitz like that, not only for himself or his relatives, but for the world. He understood that he misunderstood Auschwitz at all. And the image of the yawning officer made him see the Nazi and Nazis, not only the specific Nazi, as human beings. And they are not only human beings, they're even weak. There stands an officer. He stands there in the crack of dawn in Auschwitz. He's tired, he's hungry, he's cold. And under LSD, the Noor succeeded in doing something which is almost impossible. And this is identifying with his perpetrator and the perpetrators of the Jewish people. And he says to himself, does he hate me? He doesn't even know me. And from this moment on, he understood that relating to Auschwitz as another planet or to the Nazis as Satans is completely wrong, because these are human beings. And if these are human beings, that there is another understanding which is crucial to the Noor's way of thinking in the second part of his life. Everyone and anyone could be in this position, even him. And when he says, I could have been him, what director Tom Klass did is that he put the Noor's image where the image of the Nazi was. This is a very dangerous move for a director, but he told me in an interview that he decided to do it because the Noor said it himself. He said it could have been him. It is I, man, who created Auschwitz. These are not Satan. These are not aliens. These are human beings. And if a group of human beings could have done it, then the whole humankind must be very, very careful for what he does, because man are doing it. Humans are responsible for building this terrible place, for sending the Jews to their death. So for 30 years, he described Auschwitz as another planet, as a different planet. But since this life-changing moment in 1976 in the Netherlands, in the clinic under LSD, Katzetnik or Dinur understand that something completely different. These are human beings. This is not another planet. And the film ends with this rare interview he gave to Ram Evron on Israeli television in the 1980s. So the film moves from animated documentary to real documentary. And the voice of Katzetnik that we heard throughout the film, now we also see his image, and he says very clearly, Auschwitz is not another planet like I thought. Once you say it was another planet or the devil, it's an escape. Then you've learned nothing. It is you, the human, who can choose, pay attention, and choose life. And this was Dinur's message to the world in the second half of his life. It's completely different from the message he gave the world in the first half of his life through his books. This was a complete change within his way of thinking, his mind, and he wrote it in his book, Sof Nedma. And this was the last interview Dinur gave. Again, he was a very, very private person. And this was the end of his messages to the world. So, to conclude, this is only one example of what animated documentary can do. And there are other, again, tens of films that were produced in Israel, in the United States, in Australia, in Southern Africa, and so on, that discuss the Holocaust through animation. And the advantages of these films are mainly two. First of all, it enables us viewers to enter a time that we are not part of. We can see what happened in the streets of Europe during World War II, what happened in the ghettos and concentration camps during the Holocaust, because animation can animate it for us. And the second thing is that we can enter the survivor's mind and the descendants of the survivor's mind to see what's going on there, to see their hallucinations, their fantasies, their dreams, the way they think about reality. And when we enter their mind, I believe it gives us viewers a deeper way of understanding how a trauma, in this case the Holocaust, had affected the survivors and their descendants. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Liat. That was so engaging and so fascinating. And I simply admire your research and all the hard work that you have put. So I actually have two small questions. To begin with, I'm interested to know that if there was any particular event or some series of events that triggered the shift to these animated documentaries. And secondly, on one hand, we say that the animated documentaries are not a reflection of realities, but then on the other hand, they point towards the inward and represent the internal worlds. So how do we deal with this paradox?
Okay, I think I'm going to begin with, thank you for the questions. I think I'm going to begin with the second one. I don't think it's a paradox, because when we understand that nothing is a reflection of reality, and the way or the place you put the camera is also a way you decide how to introduce a topic, then you understand that when we talk about any kind of film, be it a documentary, an interview, or animated documentary, there's always a director involved, there's always editing, there is always parts of reality within it, but it's not a mirror. It's not a mirror to reality. So what we get here is the opportunity to experience Dinur's mind as Tom Klass understood it. Maybe another director could have done it differently. I don't know. But this is one way of looking at it, and maybe beginning to understand deeply what's happening within the soul of a survivor. first of all. And for your first question, you're absolutely right. There are many reasons who made animated documentary much more popular or acceptable in the 1990s. And as I said earlier, first of all, it's the postmodern world, meaning nothing is truth. And if nothing is truth, then documentary is not a higher genre than animated documentary. Second one is technology. As technology developed, you can show through animation things in a much better way. And I must add that graphic novels also contributed a lot to the development of animated documentaries. And if we thought that we can't address serious topics through animated documentary because animation is Mickey Mouse and Donald Duck, here came Art Spiegelman and showed us through Mouse and Mouse 2 that one can address the most difficult topic, his father, the Holocaust, being a Holocaust survivor, being the son of a Holocaust survivor, and you can address it through a graphic novel which discusses these themes through cats and mice. And if he can do it in such a respectable, dignified way and address it in something that was, again, considered juvenile and so on, then animated documentary can address it as too in a very serious way. And the success of Mouse and the Pulitzer Prize and so on, I believe it was a great push of the success of animated documentary and the understanding of directors that they can approach difficult, troubling topics through animated documentaries.
Great, and I think it was during this time, around the 1980s and 90s, that PTSD was formally recognized by the DSM third year.
So
Yes.
true. And another thing I can mention is that in the 1990s, there was, and I'm very careful with my words, there began what we can call a fatigue of classic Holocaust films. And again, I'm sorry that I'm using this language, but these are citations from what directors had told me. This is their words. And many directors in the last couple of decades who wanted to deal with the Holocaust told me that they were looking for a different angle. They didn't want to do, and this sentence repeated in almost every interview, they didn't want to direct another Holocaust film. So getting to know this genre gave them an opportunity to address this topic in a new way, which is not so conventional, and you can show different aspects and different things because you work with animation. So I think this is another reason for the success in the last couple of decades.
Great, thank you so much. Any other questions? Please feel free to unmute yourself and ask any questions if you have. Yeah.
Thank you so much for that presentation. Yeah, it's interesting. I was just talking with students about attempting to make an anime style horror movie, and it had relevance to our class topic. But I'm wondering, do you think that a horror movie genre, as opposed to documentary, do you think that Holocaust films could or should go in that direction to attempt to scare, to attempt maybe to traumatize and allow people to embody the terror of it?
I understand your question, and I think, as I always think, that it's not the genre, but the director. I mean, there are documentaries, there are Holocaust documentaries that are simply, it's hard to say it wonderful, but they're so wide opening, and they make you understand and learn so much about the Holocaust. And there are horrible Holocaust documentaries, which are a shame to the director and the audience. And I can say the same about animated documentaries. There are wonderful, wonderful films who tell the story in such a sensitive way. And there are films which are a bit, problematic. And I think the same goes for any genre, even a horror film. I believe that in the right hands, one can create very interesting horror film about the Holocaust, which is not cheapening the Holocaust, is not cheapening the memory or ridicule the survivors. And in other hands, it can be a disaster. So I really believe it has to do with the person who deals with it, his or her knowledge, and the way they address the topic, and not the genre. The genre is never the problem. The person can be the problem or the answer to this question.
Interesting. Yeah, that's great. I do wonder, and for me, I debate a bit of an ethical issue, a potential ethical issue of fictionalizing elements of the Holocaust. Do you only tell stories that have actually happened, or do you have some artistic liberty with it? And the reason I have a slight, or at least I'm curious about the moral implications, is because of Holocaust deniers who talk about these were paid actors, or some of these stories were made up, and so if a director or a screenwriter makes something, takes a real story and fictionalizes it, or just and at a whole cloth has a completely fabricated story, does it help the Holocaust denier and their case or not? Any thoughts about whether it's okay to have some artistic liberties when it comes to the Holocaust?
Okay, so first of all, there are always artistic liberties, because even when you make a documentary, let's say that you make a documentary and you sit with a group of survivors and you enter the editing room with hundreds of hours or tens of hours, and then you have to compress it to 40 minutes. So you always change it. This is why this is not a mirror to reality. You always have the upper hand. This is your view of this interaction with this specific group of survivors, and maybe somebody else would have made a completely different film. And I can completely understand what you say about this problem with Holocaust deniers when you take a story that was or wasn't and you turn it into a fiction film. And we all remember the criticism Spielberg got about this shower scene in Schindler's List, when the women enter the shower and then they think that it's gas, but it's water, and the gas chambers, of course, didn't look the same, and so on. It is a great problem. But again, a filmmaker is not an historian, and he doesn't have to be an historian. So I think there's always going to be an artistic liberty, and I think there are always going to be deniers. Even when you speak to a survivor, they're going to say, he made it up, Jews are liars, and they love money, so maybe he got money, and so on. So I don't think this is going to change. I just want to remind you a letter that Holocaust survivor Elie Wiesel wrote, to an open letter he wrote, I think, to the New York Times. It was when the series Holocaust was first aired in 1978. And he wrote that it's a disgrace. How can you take the Holocaust and turn it into a soap opera or something like that? How can you fictionalize the Holocaust? How dare you? Either it's a soap opera or a fiction, or it's a Holocaust. It can go together. But we know today that this series had such a great impact on the debate about the Holocaust and Holocaust awareness and knowledge around the world and in Germany. And this was the series that opened the Germans in the late 1970s to discuss the Holocaust, what they didn't do for decades before, because between 45 and the 70s, there was almost a complete silence in Germany regarding the Holocaust. So you can see that a specific series, which is fictional and has these problems that you discussed, and there are major problems, also has such a great impact. This is why this is such a complex topic, and we cannot decide whether it's wrong or right. It's only very, very complex and has its upsides and its downsides.
Excellent. Thank you. One last question, and this is definitely a little bit off topic, but I would love to get your opinion on it. What film would you say is the most graphic in terms of realism? So not animated. Well, I guess, or would it be animated? Is there a film, something that you recommend that gives the most graphic portrayal, something that really connects the audience to the horrors of the Holocaust?
Documentary or an animated documentary?
Anything. I mean, any film that you can think of that has just done it, in your opinion, has done it right.
There are so many, and I'm sure that I'm forgetting some, but when I talk about animated documentary, I want to go back. You can see the cover. Just a minute. I want to show you the cover of my book. Just a minute, because this is very important because it's from this film. This film is titled Nocham Leben. It's by an Australian filmmaker. Just a minute. Where is it? Where is it? Where is it? Okay. You can see here, this is an extract from the film. It's called Nocham Leben, and the director is Anita. I'm sorry, I forgot. Anita Lester is the director. She is a third generation, and she created again, I can't use this word, but it's beautifully done animated documentary about her relative, Holocaust survivor, who survived because after a mass shooting on the Baltic Sea, her sister lay on top of her, and this is how the bullets didn't reach her. And she survived, and she got off the pit. And then towards the end of the war, she was also raped by German soldiers, and she survived. She moved to Australia, but her soul never healed. And this film, which is completely abstract, you don't see visuals, but you hear this spoken word of Anita Lester as her relative, talking about her aunt, talking about her encounters with her aunt, who wrote several books and gave testimonies and so on. And it's all in black and white and red. And for me, it was one of the most powerful films I've ever seen, because Anita Lester talks herself about this, the way that she connected to her aunt, this synergy between them, and this voiceover of Anita, again, like a spoken word, something between a song and a monologue, which discusses the horrible, horrible experiences of her aunt, was for me, and in my opinion, the most, the strongest animated documentary I have seen. This is why I chose to put it on the cover of my book, because I talked earlier about the disadvantages of these films. And what I say in my book, here's a spoiler, that I think the problem with many of these films is that many of them, not the one that I've showed you here and not this one, walk towards the place of little stories of salvation and grace and bravery and so on. But these stories do not reflect the Holocaust. They happen, they are all real. This is animated documentary, but this is not the Holocaust. There is no mass murder, there are no open graves, there are no tortured people, ghettos or concentration camps. There are people who give a hand here and give a bread there. And it's a bit problematic when we talk about Holocaust memory for the next generations, because we talk about a trauma in which almost 6 million people were slaughtered, and we cannot discuss it through little stories of bravery and solidarity and so on. This is why I think Anita Lester's movie, again, the cover of my book, is one of the most important films, because she doesn't shy away from the atrocities. She addresses the atrocities. She talks about it very bluntly. And I think this is the way one should do it if we want to address the biggest tragedy that happened to the Jewish people in the history.
Perfect. Thank you. That's exactly what I was looking for. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right. I don't think we have any further questions for you, Professor, so I'll just let you have the last word.
Thank you for having me, and I hope you're going to read my book. And again, I think it's a very interesting new genre that we must all know. And acknowledge is again, the new things it brings to Holocaust commemoration, but also its problematic aspects.